In the annals of human history, few methods of execution have matched the sheer brutality and prolonged agony of scaphism. This ancient Persian torture technique, also known as the boats, stands as a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the horrifying ingenuity of our ancestors. Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous philosopher, once wrote, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." This sentiment resonates deeply when confronting the horrors of scaphism, as it highlights the terrifying capacity for monstrosity that can emerge in the name of justice or punishment. The origins of scaphism can be traced back to the vast Persian Empire, which stretched from the Balkans to Central Asia. At its height in the 5th century BCE, Persia was a powerful force in the ancient world. The term scaphism itself comes from the Greek word cai, which means scooped or hollowed out. This etymology offers a chilling hint at the nature of the torture method, in which the victim's body was transformed into a vessel for unimaginable suffering. Scaphism was primarily employed during the reign of King Artaxerxes II, a time marked by intense political intrigue and brutal power struggles within the Achaemenid dynasty. One of the most well-documented accounts of scaphism comes from the Greek historian Plutarch, who wrote about the execution of Mithridates, a soldier accused of killing Cyrus the Younger in 401 BCE. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, spares no detail in describing the horrific ordeal. The victim's execution took place in the ancient city of Pepilis, which was the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire. The grim ceremony began with Mithridates being forcibly fed a mixture of milk and honey, a combination that would soon play a crucial role in his torment. The executioners then smeared the victim's face with the same sweet concoction, a preparation that would attract insects to feast on him. Once the victim's face was coated in the honeyed mixture, he was bound between 2 wooden boats or hollowed-out tree trunks, leaving only his head, hands, and feet exposed. This gruesome spectacle, which was as much about public humiliation as it was about physical suffering, became a public display meant to serve as a warning to others. As Plutarch notes, the sight of such a punishment was meant to strike terror into the hearts of the public, acting as a deterrent for would-be wrongdoers. The boats, with their human cargo, would then be left to float in a stagnant pond or swamp, where the real horror of scaphism began to unfold. The milk and honey mixture that had been forced down the victim's throat began to cause severe diarrhea, which the victim was unable to control. With no means to move or clean himself, the condemned man was forced to lie in his own excrement, attracting countless insects. The ancient Greek physician Ctesias, who served in the court of Artaxerxes II, provided further details about the horrors of this process. According to Ctesias, the victim's eyes were often the first target of the swarming insects, adding the terrifying element of blindness to the already unbearable agony. Flies, attracted by the sweet smell of honey and the overpowering stench of human waste, would swarm over the victim in large numbers. These flies laid their eggs in the exposed flesh, and soon maggots began to feast on the still-living body. The combination of insects, exposure to the elements, and the victim's own bodily functions created a perfect storm of suffering that could last for days or even weeks. Unlike many other forms of execution, scaphism was designed to prolong agony for as long as possible. Executioners would return every day to force-feed the victim more milk and honey, ensuring that they remained alive and conscious throughout the ordeal. The duration of the suffering was intended to be as excruciating as possible. Victims could survive up to 17 days, enduring unspeakable physical and psychological torment before succumbing to their fate. King Darius I is said to have favored this horrific method for particularly heinous crimes, believing that a prolonged death served as a greater deterrent than a quick execution. Scaphism was not just reserved for the worst of the criminals. It was also used on political enemies and anyone who threatened the power of the ruling elite. The execution of Mithridates is one of the best documented cases of scaphism, but it was far from the only one. This method of execution was reportedly used across the Persian Empire, striking fear into the hearts of those who dared defy the king. One particularly gruesome variation of scaphism involved using two boats with the victim sandwiched between them, creating a kind of human cocoon. This version of scaphism was said to have been used on a Persian general named Parysatis who had fallen out of favor with the king. The victim, trapped within the boats, would be set adrift on a lake, floating in the agonizing embrace of their impending death. This method of execution was as much a public spectacle as it was a tool for instilling fear into the masses. The psychological impact of scaphism cannot be overstated. The knowledge that one's body would become a living nest for insects, coupled with a complete loss of dignity and control, must have been just as torturous as the physical pain itself. The horror of being slowly eaten alive while conscious and helpless, trapped in a stinking, festering boat, was more than many could endure. The slow, inevitable process of death under such conditions must have been unimaginable. The sheer horror of scaphism doesn't just stem from the physical pain but also from the psychological suffering endured by the victim. The idea that one's body could become the vessel of such torment, constantly under attack from flies, maggots, and the relentless heat of the sun, turned scaphism into an ordeal designed not just to punish, but to utterly humiliate and break the spirit of the condemned. As Plutarch's account of Mithridates shows, the cruelty of this execution method was far more than a punishment for a crime. It was an act of terror, meant to remind the populace of the brutal power of the king. It's also important to understand the public spectacle that scaphism created. The victim, bound and exposed to the elements, would remain floating in the boat for days or weeks, allowing for public observation of their agonizing suffering. These executions were often performed in highly populated areas where people could witness the torment firsthand, making the spectacle a tool of fear and control. The power dynamics of the Persian Empire, where those in positions of power held absolute dominion over life and death, were manifest in this gruesome display. It was as much about exerting control over the masses as it was about punishing the individual. While scaphism's most infamous accounts come from the Persian Empire, this form of execution was not unique to Persia. Throughout history, rulers have used prolonged forms of suffering as a way to assert power and strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Scaphism, with its prolonged and brutal nature, serves as a stark reminder of humanity's potential for cruelty when it comes to exerting control. In fact, many later forms of execution, such as the breaking wheel or the brazen bull, followed a similar principle, inflicting immense, extended suffering to ensure that the punishment served as a deterrent to anyone who might challenge the authority of the ruling power. One of the darkest aspects of scaphism was its association with power struggles. When King Darius I favored scaphism as a form of punishment for those who posed a serious threat to his rule, he recognized the method's ability to instill a lasting fear. The prolonged suffering of the victim, the slow and agonizing death, served not only as a punishment, but as a warning to anyone contemplating treason. In this sense, scaphism was as much a political tool as it was a form of execution. Victims of scaphism didn't just face death, they faced an agonizing, public, drawn-out process of dying. What made scaphism so horrific wasn't just the agony itself, but the fact that it wasn't intended to be quick. While many other forms of execution, such as beheading or hanging, were designed for a swift end, scaphism was deliberately slow. The victim remained alive in their own filth, forced to endure hours, days, or even weeks of suffering before death finally claimed them. The use of milk and honey, the very concoction that initiated the process, further exemplifies the sadistic ingenuity behind this execution method. The victim's excrement would not only attract insects, but the combination of waste and honey created the perfect breeding ground for maggots, which would feast on the exposed flesh, further prolonging the victim's suffering. The horror of scaphism was also compounded by its public nature. Unlike secretive or private executions, which allowed the condemned to die without an audience, scaphism was meant to be seen. Public executions, especially those involving scaphism, were meant to act as a deterrent to crime. As Cicero noted, the terror of punishment must often be used to keep evildoers in check. This macabre form of execution became an exhibition of control, power, and fear. The exposed victim, helpless and enduring unimaginable pain, became an example of what would happen to anyone who dared defy the empire. But the victims of scaphism didn't just serve as deterrents, they became part of a larger cultural and political narrative. The fact that scaphism was used for high-profile individuals, such as soldiers or generals who had fallen from favor, speaks to the method's dual role as both a punishment and a tool of political maneuvering. The use of scaphism on generals like Parysatis highlighted the political dimension of the execution, where the punishment wasn't just about crime, it was about the threat to the power structure. Scaphism, therefore, was more than an execution method. It was an instrument of statecraft used to demonstrate the power of the ruler and the ultimate consequences of betrayal. In the long term, scaphism left a legacy that extended far beyond the Persian Empire. Its influence can be seen in later forms of execution that focused on prolonging suffering as a form of punishment. The breaking wheel, for example, a device used extensively in medieval Europe, was similar to scaphism in its intention to inflict pain over an extended period. Though the devices themselves were different, the underlying principle remained the same: to break the body and spirit of the condemned through prolonged suffering. In fact, the psychological impact of scaphism was so profound that it left a permanent mark on the cultural psyche of those who witnessed it. The image of a human being suspended in a boat, unable to move and left at the mercy of insects and the elements, became a symbol of absolute degradation. This aspect of scaphism, its power to strip the individual of all dignity and reduce them to an object of public spectacle, contributed to its lasting legacy as one of the most brutal forms of execution ever devised. In popular culture, scaphism has continued to capture the imagination, with its horrific details often resurfacing in works of art, literature, and film. In the 2014 film The Pyramid, a scene inspired by scaphism is used to evoke the terror of ancient torture methods, bringing this long-forgotten practice to the forefront of modern consciousness. Its continued resonance speaks to our fascination with violence, power, and the dark aspects of history that we prefer not to acknowledge. Despite its horrifying nature, scaphism remains a crucial part of our understanding of the past. It serves as a reminder of the extremes humanity can reach in the pursuit of control and punishment. While modern societies have moved away from such barbaric practices, scaphism forces us to confront the depths of cruelty that human beings are capable of. It forces us to ask hard questions about justice, punishment, and the lengths to which a ruler will go to maintain power. As we continue to reflect on the horrors of scaphism, it's important to remember that history is not just a collection of events. It's a reminder of our potential for both great cruelty and great compassion. In examining these brutal methods of execution, we're not just uncovering the atrocities of the past. We're learning valuable lessons about the importance of human dignity, compassion, and justice. The story of scaphism is one that we must never forget, as it stands as a dark mirror to our history, urging us to ensure that such horrors are never repeated.